Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
There's a moment, and maybe you know exactly the one I'm talking about, when you catch a glimpse of yourself in a mirror or in a quiet pause between the noise of the day and something inside you goes still. Not peaceful still, hollow still, and a voice, soft but relentless, whispers, "When did I stop being her?" Not the her you were at 20, full of sharp edges and untested dreams, but the her who had opinions she didn't apologize for. The her who said no and meant it. The her who knew in her bones what she wanted before the wanting got buried under everyone else's needs, everyone else's emergencies, everyone else's definitions of who she should be. That's not aging. That's not wisdom. That's something quieter and far more painful. That's what it feels like to have betrayed yourself. And I want to sit with you in that for a minute, because I think we rush past it. We call it sacrifice or maturity, or just being realistic. We dress it up in the language of virtue so we don't have to feel the grief underneath it. But grief is exactly what it is. You are mourning a woman who is still alive, a version of you that got quieter and quieter until one day you stopped hearing her altogether. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it. Think back, not to a dramatic moment, not to some obvious crossroads, but to the small ones. The time someone spoke over you and you let them, and then later told yourself it wasn't worth the conflict. The dream you set on the shelf just for now and never picked back up. The morning you woke up and did exactly what was expected of you and felt nothing. Not resentment, not joy, just nothing. Like going through the motions in a life that used to fit and somehow got altered to fit everyone else. When did that start? For most women, especially women who grew up being told that love looks like sacrifice, that good women give more than they take, the betrayal doesn't arrive all at once. It's not a single dramatic surrender. It's 1,000 tiny ones. 1,000 small moments where you swallowed what you actually felt, chose the path of least resistance, told yourself you were being mature when really you were just exhausted from the effort of being seen. You gave up the sanctuary of your own mind and convinced yourself the trade was worth it. And here's the part that's almost unbearable to acknowledge. Nobody forced you. That's the weight we carry that no one talks about. The betrayal of self isn't usually something done to us. It's something we participate in, slowly, quietly, with the best intentions. We handed ourselves away piece by piece to partners and children, to aging parents and demanding friendships, to institutions and expectations and the endless cultural script that told us our value lived entirely in our usefulness to others. And now, somewhere in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, you're sitting with the unspoken truth that you don't really know who you are outside of the roles you've played wide. Mother, caretaker, employee, the reliable one, the one who holds it all together. Who are you when no one needs anything from you? If that question makes you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is important. It's the signal that something real is still alive in you. It means she's still in there, that original version of you, the one with the quiet dreams and the unspoken truths and the full, complicated inner life that never stopped mattering, even when you acted like it did. This is where I want to start, not with solutions, not with a tidy list of steps to reclaim yourself, as if you were something lost in a coat pocket. I want to start with the honest reckoning that something happened. That the life you're living may have drifted, incrementally, from the life your truest self actually wanted, and that this is painful, profoundly, legitimately painful. Because you can love every person you gave yourself to. You can love them completely, fiercely, without regret, and still grieve what that giving cost you. Those two truths can live in the same heart. They do for so many women. The love is real, and so is the loss. You're not ungrateful. You're not selfish. You're not falling apart. You're just finally honest enough to feel it. Here's what nobody ever told you when you were young and still forming the blueprint of who you'd become. The rules you learned about how to be a woman, about what made you lovable, acceptable enough. Those rules weren't neutral. They were a set of instructions handed down so quietly, so consistently, that they felt like truth, like gravity, like just the way things are. But they weren't truth. They were conditioning. And the tragedy is, by the time most of us are old enough to question them, we've already spent decades living inside them like they were our own skin. Think about the first time you made yourself smaller to make someone else more comfortable. How old were you? 7, 11, 14. Maybe you had a big personality and were told you were too much. Maybe you were angry about something real and righteous and were told that anger wasn't ladylike. Maybe you were brilliant and perceptive and someone, somewhere, made you feel like that was threatening rather than beautiful. And so you learned. You learned the art of the strategic disappearance. Dial yourself back here. Smooth the edges there. Smile when you'd rather not. Agree when you'd rather push back. That's not a personality flaw. That's survival. In the environment you were in, whether it was a home that required your compliance, a culture that rewarded your smallness, or relationships that only seemed to function when you needed nothing, making yourself smaller worked. It kept the peace. It earned the love. It made you safe. The problem is that what we learn in order to survive, we eventually confuse with who we are. And so these coping strategies, the people-pleasing, the self-silencing, the reflexive putting of everyone else's comfort ahead of your own, they stop being choices somewhere along the way. They became automatic. They became your default. They became, if I can say this gently, you. Or at least the version of you that the world got to see. There's a particular kind of woman, and I suspect you recognize yourself in this, who became so proficient at reading a room, at anticipating needs, at managing emotions that weren't even hers to manage, that she lost the thread back to her own interior life. She became, in a very real sense, an expert in everyone else's experience and a stranger to her own. Ask her what her friends need. She'll know immediately. Ask her what she needs. She'll go quiet. Not because she's evasive, because she genuinely doesn't know anymore. The antenna that was supposed to be pointed inward got permanently redirected outward, and somewhere along the way she forgot it ever had another direction. Does that land for you? And here's where it gets even more tender. Because I want to name something that doesn't get named nearly enough. A lot of us didn't just absorb these patterns passively from culture. We absorbed them directly from our mothers. Women who had their own unhealed wounds, their own unlived lives, their own quiet surrenders. Women who loved us the best they could with the tools they had. And in loving us, sometimes taught us the very patterns of self-abandonment they themselves were drowning in. Your mother, perhaps, never asked for anything. Never said, "I'm tired." Never admitted she was lonely or disappointed or quietly furious about the smallness of the box she'd been given to live in. She just kept going. She kept giving. And you watched, and you learned. Not the lesson she intended. She wanted better for you. Of course she did, but the lesson her life taught, that a woman's job is to endure beautifully. And so when your own life got heavy, when your own needs felt inconvenient or excessive, what did you do? You endured beautifully. You held your chin up and kept going and told yourself that was strength. And in some ways it was. But it was also a kind of loyalty to a lineage of self-erasure that you never consciously signed up for. This is what I mean when I say the wound is deep. It didn't start with you. It was waiting for you before you even arrived. Passed down through hands that held you with love, through voices that shaped you with the best intentions, through a culture that praised the woman who gave everything and asked politely for nothing. The betrayal of self for so many women in your generation is an inherited betrayal, a tradition, almost a rite of passage that no one questioned because everyone was doing it. And here's the most important thing I can say to you right now. In this moment, None of that was your fault. Not the little girl who went quiet to keep the peace. Not the young woman who shrank herself to keep the love. Not the middle-aged woman who gave and gave until she couldn't remember what she wanted. None of it was weakness. All of it made sense in the context it was created. But, and this is where we turn a corner together. Understanding why you abandoned yourself doesn't mean you have to keep doing it. Because here's the quiet, radical truth that women your age are often the first in their entire lineage to discover. It is not too late to become loyal to yourself. And more than that, you may be the first woman in your family line who actually gets to choose. Not the woman your mother was. Not the woman your culture prescribed. Not the woman shaped entirely by what other people needed from you. Just you. The real one. The one who got buried, but not lost. She's still there. Underneath the years of giving, underneath the roles and the expectations and the beautiful endurance, she's still there. And she has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for you to finally come home to her. But first, you have to fully understand what you traded away. And that's what part 3 is for, the honest inventory of what self-betrayal actually costs us in the body, in our relationships, in the quiet rooms of our own minds. There's a particular kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. You know the one. You wake up after a full night and you're still heavy, still somewhere between depleted and disconnected. And you've probably blamed it on age, on hormones, on stress, on the weather, on 100 reasonable external things. But I want to offer you a different possibility. One that's harder to sit with, but more honest. Sometimes that bone, deep exhaustion isn't a physical problem. It's the accumulated weight of years spent being someone other than yourself. That's not a metaphor. That's biology. When we consistently suppress what we actually feel, when we perform okayness we don't feel, when we swallow our real needs and paste a functional face over genuine pain, our nervous system keeps score. The body doesn't forget what the mind has learned to overlook. It holds it. In the tightness across your shoulders. In the jaw you clench at night. In the low-grade anxiety that has become so familiar you barely notice it anymore, like background noise in a house you've lived in too long. The cost of self-betrayal isn't just emotional. It's deeply, undeniably physical. And yet, we've been so thoroughly trained to dismiss our own physical signals, haven't we? To push through. To not make a fuss. To wait until the discomfort is serious before we allow ourselves to address it. I've spoken with so many women who describe the same experience. A persistent feeling of unease that they couldn't quite name, a restlessness beneath the surface. Like something in them was quietly knocking on a door that no one was answering. And they kept busy to drown it out. They kept serving, kept managing, kept their hands full so they wouldn't have to sit in the silence long enough to hear what that knocking was actually saying. What was it saying? This isn't it. This isn't all of you. You are more than this. But it's easier to stay busy than to hear that. Because if you hear it, really hear it, then you have to decide what to do with it. And that feels terrifying when you've spent a lifetime defining yourself through your relationships, your roles, your usefulness to others. If you strip all of that away, even temporarily, even just to look, who are you? What do you actually want? What would your life look like if you designed it around your own truth instead of everyone else's comfort? Those questions feel dangerous. I know, they feel selfish. And here's where I need to speak very directly to that word, selfish. Because it has done more damage to women's inner lives than almost anything else I can name. We have been taught, by religion, by culture, by family, by the slow osmosis of 1,000 subtle messages, that a woman who prioritizes herself is selfish. That her needs are secondary. That to want things for herself, to protect her time, her energy, her peace, to say this is mine and I'm not giving it away, that is something to be ashamed of. Something small. Something that makes you less loving, less good, less worthy of the love you've worked your whole life to earn. And so you internalized that. You made yourself the last item on your own list. You gave from empty reserves and called it devotion. You smiled through your own heartbreak and called it grace. You silenced your own needs so expertly that you eventually stopped being able to distinguish between genuine generosity and terrified compliance. Because there is a difference. I want you to feel that distinction. Genuine generosity flows from abundance. It comes from a woman who knows herself, who tends to herself, who gives from a full and conscious place. It feels like choice, like warmth, like love that moves outward naturally because it first took root inward. Terrified compliance looks like generosity from the outside, but from the inside, it feels like fear, like the chronic low-level anxiety of wondering what happens if you stop. Will they still love you? Will they still need you? Will you still matter if you're not performing your usefulness every single day? That's not giving. That's bargaining. And it costs you everything, slowly, in installments so small you don't notice the balance draining until one day you reach inside for something to offer. Something to give to yourself, and you find the well dry. That's where resentment is born, not the loud, explosive kind, the quiet kind. The kind that lives in the pause before you answer. I'm fine. The kind that surfaces when someone asks something of you that, on any other day, would feel like nothing. And today it feels like the last straw you're not sure you can carry. The kind that makes you feel guilty for feeling it, because you love these people, because you chose this life, because who are you to be resentful? But resentment isn't ingratitude. Resentment is information. It's your truest self tapping you on the shoulder and saying something here is out of balance. Something here is costing more than it should. Something here needs to change. And if you've been numbing that signal for years, through business, through caregiving, through wine or food or scrolling, or the endless consumption of other people's stories to avoid sitting in your own, the bill eventually comes due. Not as punishment, not because life is cruel, but because the self you've been betraying is remarkably persistent. She doesn't give up on you. She just gets louder. And what starts as a whisper becomes a restlessness, becomes a depression, becomes a crisis, becomes the question you can't ask. Is this really all my life is going to be? That question, when it finally surfaces, and it does surface for most women, somewhere in this season of life, feels like devastation. But I want you to hear me when I tell you that question is not a sign that you've failed. It's a sign that you've finally gotten honest. It's the first real conversation you've had with yourself in years. And as painful as it is also, quietly, stubbornly, the beginning of something. Because you cannot find your way back to yourself until you are willing to admit you've drifted. You can't come home until you're willing to admit you've been away. And you've been away for a long time, haven't you? The women I admire most, the ones who arrive at this season of life and somehow seem to glow with a kind of quiet authority, a settled self-possession that has nothing to do with youth and everything to do with knowing themselves. They all share one thing. They were willing to look at the cost, not to punish themselves for it, not to crumble under the grief of it, but to look at it clearly, honestly, without flinching and say, yes, that happened. I let that happen. And I'm still here. And now I get to choose differently. That willingness, that unflinching, tender, courageous willingness is where everything changes. Which means we've arrived at the place where the hardest and most beautiful question lies. What does coming home to yourself actually look like? Not the inspirational poster version, not the treat yourself oversimplification, the real thing, the daily, imperfect, deeply personal practice of choosing yourself, not instead of others, but alongside them, of rebuilding the relationship with the woman you've been neglecting the longest. Coming home to yourself doesn't begin with a grand gesture. It doesn't begin with quitting something or leaving someone or booking a solo trip to somewhere beautiful or declaring to the people in your life that things are going to be different now. Those things may come. Some of them may need to come. But they're not the beginning. The beginning is so much quieter than that. It begins in a single, private moment, one that no one else will witness or applaud. When you hear that small internal voice say something true about what you feel or what you need, and instead of immediately talking yourself out of it, instead of labeling it inconvenient or selfish or unrealistic, you simply say, yes, that's real. That matters. I hear you. That's it. That's the first step home. It sounds almost too small, doesn't it? After everything we've walked through together, the years of conditioning, the inherited wounds, the accumulated cost in the body and the spirit, it seems like the antidote should be something equally large, something dramatic, something that matches the scale of the loss. But here's what I've come to understand, both in my own life and in sitting with so many women who've walked this particular road. The betrayal of self happened in small moments. Tiny surrenders, one after another, each one barely noticeable on its own. And so the return happens the same way. Small moments of choosing yourself, small acts of loyalty to your own inner life, one quiet decision at a time, until the accumulation of those decisions begins to feel like a different kind of life. Not a perfect life, not a life without complexity or compromise or love that requires real sacrifice, but a life that has you in it, the real you. Not just the functional, reliable, endlessly giving version of you, but the woman underneath all of that, with her real feelings and her honest needs and her particular way of seeing the world that belongs entirely and only to her. So what does that actually look like? Let's get specific, because I think we owe each other that. The first act of return is learning to hear yourself again. Most women who've spent years in self-betrayal have developed a very sophisticated internal editing system. A thought begins to form. I don't want to go to that dinner, or that comment hurt me, or I wish someone would ask how I'm doing. And before it even fully surfaces, the editing system fires. Don't be difficult. Don't be sensitive. Don't be needy. And the thought gets swallowed before it ever becomes a feeling, before the feeling ever becomes a need, before the need ever becomes a word spoken out loud. Your first practice is simply to let the thought finish. To sit in the small sanctuary of your own mind and let what's true be true, even if only in there, even if you never act on it, even if you never say it to a single soul, just letting it exist, just witnessing yourself honestly. This sounds passive. It isn't. For a woman who has spent decades overriding her own inner experience, simply noticing is an act of profound courage. It's the beginning of trusting yourself again. And trust, like everything worth having, has to be rebuilt in small increments. You start by being a reliable witness to your own experience. You show up for yourself in the private space of your own awareness, consistently, without judgment. And slowly, not all at once, but steadily, you begin to remember that your inner life is real, that it's valid, that it deserves the same quality of attention you've been lavishing on everyone else for years. The second act of return is grieving what was lost without weaponizing it against yourself. This part is delicate. Because when women begin to wake up to the cost of self-betrayal, there can be a temptation to turn that awareness into a new form of self-punishment. A harsh internal audit. Look at all the years I wasted. Look at all the ways I failed myself. Why did I let this happen for so long? Please don't do that. I mean it gently but firmly, please don't do that. The woman who gave herself away so completely, for so long, was doing what she knew how to do with the understanding she had at the time. She was surviving. She was loving the people in her life with the tools available to her. She was navigating a world that gave her very little permission to be fully herself. And she did the best she could inside those constraints. She deserves your compassion, not your contempt. Grief is appropriate. Grief is healthy. Sitting with the tender sadness of unlived years, of unexplored dreams, of the version of yourself that stayed quiet for too long. That's not weakness. That's honesty. Let yourself feel it. Let it move through you the way grief needs to move, which is through, not around. But grieve the way you would grieve for someone you love. With tenderness. With the understanding that the losses were real, and the choices were human, and the story isn't over. Because it isn't. That's the part I need you to hold on to. The third act of return is beginning to make requests of your own life. Not demands, not ultimatums, requests. Gentle, honest, specific requests. First to yourself, then, gradually, to the people around you. What would feel nourishing to you right now? Not what should feel nourishing. Not what looks like self-care in the photographs. What actually, specifically, in your particular life with your particular history and your particular longings, what would feel like a genuine gift to yourself? Maybe it's an hour of uninterrupted silence in the morning, before the day makes its demands. Maybe it's finally taking the class you've been circling for 3 years. Maybe it's having an honest conversation with someone you love about something you've been carrying alone for too long. Maybe it's simply sitting outside in the late afternoon light and letting yourself be without agenda, without productivity, without justification. Whatever it is, and it will be yours, specific to you, not borrowed from someone else's idea of a meaningful life. It deserves to be honored. You don't need to earn it. You don't need to finish the list first. You don't need anyone's permission. You are allowed to want things. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to build a life that has room in it for your own flourishing. That is not selfishness. That is what it looks like when a woman who has spent a lifetime tending everyone else's garden finally turns and notices that her own is waiting. Not dead, just thirsty. The fourth act, and perhaps the most radical one, is letting yourself be seen. Not the performed version of you. Not the competent, composed, has it together version, the real one. The one with the complicated feelings and the old wounds and the dreams she's never spoken aloud, because they felt too fragile or too foolish or too far away from the life she'd ended up living. That woman deserves relationships in which she can exist fully. She deserves friendships that go below the surface, conversations that don't require her to manage anyone else's reaction to her honesty, intimacy that makes room for her whole complicated interior rather than just the palatable parts. And if you look around and realize those relationships are thin on the ground right now, that's okay. That's actually common. For women who've spent years presenting a curated, self-edited version of themselves, the full version of you hasn't been fully available. So the connections built around that version were necessarily partial. What's possible now is something richer. Slower, maybe. More vulnerable, definitely. But real in the way that only things built on honesty can be real. You don't need a large circle. You need honest ones. Even one person, one friend, one community, one space, where you can show up as yourself without apology and be met there with recognition and warmth. That kind of witnessing, being fully seen and genuinely accepted, is deeply healing in a way that no amount of private self-work can entirely replicate. We need each other to come home to ourselves. We were never meant to do this alone. I want to close with something I hope you'll carry with you. You are not starting over. I know it can feel that way, like you're standing at some late beginning, looking back at years that slipped by while you were busy being everything to everyone. But you're not starting over. You are continuing. You are the same woman who has loved deeply and endured quietly and held more than anyone should have to hold, and you are still here. Still breathing. Still capable of desire and curiosity and the specific, irreplaceable beauty of a life lived with intention. The unspoken truths you've been carrying, they're ready to be spoken, at least to yourself, at least in the quiet rooms of your own heart. The parts of you that went silent. They went quiet, but they didn't leave. They've been waiting with a patience that honestly humbles me. waiting for you to turn toward them with the same devotion you've given so freely to everyone else. You have spent so much of your life being indispensable to others. What might it feel like to become indispensable to yourself? Not as a project, not as a performance of healing for anyone watching, but as a private, daily, imperfect commitment to the woman you actually are, to her specific hungers and her hard-won wisdom and her absolute right to take up space in her own life. That woman, the one underneath all the roles, beneath all the years of giving, behind the tired eyes and the capable hands, she is not lost. She is not gone. She has never stopped being worth returning to. Come home to her. She's been waiting long enough.